On everybody, this is Val here, and I'm going to be going over the support DPS role of the EC Crow. You may have heard the term thrown around when you're running in trials, uh, or you may not have. You may know what it is, you may not, but I'm going to go over the basics here real quick. What it means is a necromancer that runs the Elemental Catalyst set. It is a dungeon set that drops from the Stone Garden dungeon. And what that set does is every time you do Flame Frost or Shock damage to an enemy, you apply a stack of Flame Frost or Shock weakness to that enemy, and each one of those stacks increases their critical damage taken by an extra 5%. So if you have all three stacks up, anybody that is hitting that enemy is going to be doing an extra 15% critical damage. So that's your whole group. All 12 people is going to be doing an extra 15% critical damage, which if you have a very good group with good damage, that's a lot of extra damage that you're bringing to the group. It's very, very helpful, and it's a very sought-after role, so I do recommend farming the set and having it ready on if you have a Necromancer character, because it can be very, very helpful to the group. Um, Most raid leads that are running vet trials or endgame groups are going to have at least one Elemental Catalyst Crow in their group, so it's very, 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 very helpful. Um, it really depends if people are going to have EC Crow in the group. Sometimes they drop it out for Lucent Echoes, which comes from the new trial Lucent Citadel. But it's all going to depend on your group and how much critical damage you're bringing to the table, because there is the cap on it, which is, I believe, 120 at the moment. So, depending on what your cap is, what your critical damage is at, um, you may run Elemental Catalyst Crow and Lucent Echoes, or just one or the other. It's really going to depend on the raid lead and what they want. Um, Now, most raid leads are going to have you running a full support DPS role, which means you're going to be doing two support sets most of the time. And that's going to be Elemental Catalyst and usually a second support set. The most used are going to be War Machine and or Master Architect, which drops from Halls of Fabrication. And both of those sets have the same 5-piece bonus. They're basically the exact same set, except one is Magicka and light armor, and one is stamina and medium armor. War Machine is the medium stamina one, and Master Architect is the light Magicka one. So they're usually going to have you pair EC with a set like that, a second support set, and also the mythic called Spalder of Ruin. Now, Spalder of Ruin, anytime you crouch, it activates an aura of pride that you and 6 other group members will get an extra 260 weapon and spell damage, which is, again, just more damage for the group. So it's, like I said, this is a full-on support build. The only detriment to Spalder of Ruin is anybody benefiting from your Aura of Pride and getting that 260 weapon and spell damage is going to reduce your health, magic, and stamina recovery by 70 for each person. So if all 6 people are standing in your Aura of Pride, that is 420 less health, magic, and stamina recovery that you're getting, which it can be very difficult to sustain if you're already having trouble sustaining your rotation on Necromancer. Then adding this on top of it, it could be very difficult for you. So you're definitely going to want to work on that and make sure that it's possible for you to run it. I do run it for a group. It is not that bad as long as you are doing your rotations properly and you have the right food and whatnot. I tend to run just Artam Takeaway Broth, which is stamina food because I'm running a stamina setup. But it really depends on what you're planning on running. Um, as far as the different ways to run Elemental Catalyst and the support sets, like I said, it's going to depend on your raid lead. If they don't specifically ask for 2 support sets and Spalder, then you can just run Elemental Catalyst with another damage trial set. Usually it's going to be Reliquin. Ansel's is a good choice, so is Coral. It's really going to depend on you and what your preference is, but it's best to have a trial set. That way you're going to be getting that Minor Slayer buff at all times as well, which gives you an extra 5% damage in trials, dungeons, and arenas. You can wear Pillar of Nirn with EC. That also does good damage, but again, you're going to be losing out on that Minor Slayer passive right there that trial sets give. Um, but if your raid lead specifically doesn't ask for a second support set and Spalder, then I wouldn't bother running it. Just run the Elemental Catalyst and a second damage set. If you do end up running 2 support sets and Spalder, that's only going to leave you one helmet slot, so you're not going to be able to run a full monster set. So it's really up to you what one piece you're going to wear. I recommend grabbing a one piece that has a good one piece bonus. A lot of people just use Slimecrawl for the extra crit chance, which will up their damage a little bit. I like to use Down the House because it gives you some extra magicka and stamina to kind of counteract the Spalder. Magma Incarnate is good. That gives you some extra magicka and stamina recovery. So it's really going to be up to you what your preference is to wear with Spalder. Now, as for skills you can use in order to proc Elemental Catalyst, it's really anything that is going to do Flame, Frost, or Shock damage. You technically want damage over time abilities. That way you don't have to keep reapplying Flame, Frost, and Shock damage constantly. The dots that you lay down will take care of the debuff as long as you are on the correct bar. And with Necromancer, like I said, if you're familiar with the rotation, you're usually going to be bar swapping to your front bar in order to cast Blast Bones all the time. So your uptime should not suffer as long as you're doing your rotation properly. I will show you what the icons look like here. I do recommend having your buffs and debuffs turned on, which you can do by going into Options, Combat, and down to the bottom where it says Buffs and Debuffs. I recommend turning on Always Show, keeping everything on except for maybe permanent effects. You can turn those off, but everything else I have on. That way you'll be able to see the Elemental Catalyst weakness debuffs come on. So now on my front bar here with Elemental Catalyst, I'll throw down the Unnerving Boneyard skill and I'll show you the Frost weakness icon. So when you proc that, you see that sword there, it's like a little frosty sword. That is the Frost weakness. And if I use Mystic Siphon, that'll give me the Shock weakness. So there's Frost and Shock there. And then if I go my back bar and drop Flame, and I got all 3, Flame, Shock, and Frost. Now, the detriment to running Elemental Catalyst only on your front bar is that, let's say I use Unnerving Boneyard here, and then I swap to my back bar. Now, that Frost is only up for 3 seconds, so you have to get back to your front bar within that 3 seconds in order to get that, to make sure that Frost sword stays up. Alright, so as long as you're bar swapping every 2 skills, you should be able to keep that up, right? So you throw that down, bar swap, do your skills, then you're back to your front bar, and bam, you got back your Frost weakness. It's barely a second that it was down. And then you throw on your Shock, you can use your Flame, and then you have all 3 of your swords back up. And as long as you're keeping your dots up like that, and bar swapping back to your front bar in order to cast your Blast Bones, then your uptime shouldn't suffer too much. But if you don't think you're confident in being able to bar swap constantly back to your front bar in order to cast Blast Bones, then what you're just going to have to do is you're going to have to throw Elemental Catalyst on your body pieces and your damage set on your front bar. That way, no matter what bar you're on, as long as your dots are down, that Elemental Catalyst weakness debuff is going to be up at all times. Now the other skill that will proc Elemental Catalyst is going to be Crushing Shock. It's from the Destruction Staff skill line here. Now the detriment to Crushing Shock is that even though it procs Elemental Catalyst in all 3 elements with 1 pulse, it'll only last 3 seconds unless you're using your dots on top of Crushing Shock. Alright, see, look, if I spam Crushing Shock once, it only lasts for 3 seconds. It's a very, very short cooldown. Okay, so if you're just using Crushing Shock and not any dots in order to proc EC, then you're going to be standing here and you're going to be constantly spamming Crushing Shock. and you're not going to have time to be doing any other skills if you're just using Crushing Shock constantly like that. So if you're not confident in your uptimes with just the dots, you can run Crushing Shock and the dots. That way, everything is always up. And you can just spam Crushing Shock at will, and also throw down your dots. That way, either one or the other is always going to be activating it, and that'll give you some better uptimes as well. At least until you're more comfortable on the Necromancer and get comfortable with swapping to your front bar in order to cast Blast Bones. But until you're able to do that sufficiently, then I would just throw Elemental Catalyst on your body pieces, and then your damage set, or even your support set, Master Architect or War Machine, on your weapons and jewelry, with Spalder on the shoulder, depending on what your raid lead asks for, obviously. The other support set that I've seen some crows wear is Martial Knowledge, which can be found in Craglorn. That is also a tricky set to use. You have to keep your stamina very low in order to run it. So it definitely takes a lot of practice to run Martial Knowledge. The other skill that does proc EC is going to be your Elemental Blockade. If you're using Staff on the back bar instead of Greatsword, you can just swap Stampede out for Elemental Blockade and run it that way. I would still keep Scalding Rune because it's a very good dot and it's just very strong. But it was basically the same bar setups, except you would drop Stampede and Carve, and you would throw on Elemental Blockade, and then you have a flex spot for whatever other skill you want to use. Now, the other support set that I was explaining would be War Machine, and what that does is when you use an ultimate ability in combat, you and the 5 closest group members get Major Slayer for 1 second per 10 ultimate spent. So every time you use your ultimate, you would be giving you and the group, well, 6 members of the group, Major Slayer, which increases, their damage done to trial and arena monsters by 10%. So it's just more damage for the group. On the Necromancer, whether you're on EC Crow or just a regular Necromancer, you're going to be using the Colossus ultimate. That's pretty much what ultimate any raid lead is going to ask you to run, specifically for the buff it gives. It debuffs the enemy with major vulnerability and makes them take even more damage. So it's the Necromancer and the support sets is just a very great support role for the group. It's just proccing all kinds of extra damage for the group. Now, if you're running full-on support and not just full-on damage, you're going to use this Glacial Colossus one morph, because that's going to give some extra major vulnerability uptime. It extends it to 17 seconds as opposed to the shorter version. If you're going full damage, Pestilent Colossus is probably a little more damage for yourself, but not for the group. So it's really going to be up to you and what your raid lead asks for. But definitely going to be using one of those morphs in content. On your front bar, you can run Dawnbreaker for more damage, or you can throw on Necro Res just for some utility and helping the group get back up if they die. So that's going to be your call also. Other than that, that is pretty much the basics of Elemental Catalyst and running this set and being a support DPS. It's really just to help the group. Your damage is really not what is important, but if you want to know what the highest you can get is, if you're just wearing EC and another damage set on console, the highest I've seen is about 105k DPS. With both support sets and Spalder, you're probably looking at about 85k on the dummy. If you're doing just the support sets and Spalder, it drops it down to about 85. But if your raid lead doesn't ask you for full-on support and Spalder, then just wear EC and a damage set and keep those dots up. But like I said, it's up to you how you want to build it. If you want to wear EC on the body so you can keep your dots and uptimes up a little bit better. If you're not comfortable with the stamp setup, that's fine. As long as you're keeping up that flame, frost, and shock weakness at all times, then I don't think your raid lead's going to care how you're wearing it, because he's getting an extra 15% critical damage for the entire group. But that's pretty much it. If you have any specific questions, you can leave them in the comments, or you can DM me directly on Discord. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and you guys have a good one.